So today's scriptures reading is from Matthew 21, 1 to 11. When they had come near Jerusalem and had reached Bethphage at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go into the village ahead of you, and immediately you will find a donkey tied and her colt with her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, just say this: 'The Lord needs them,' and he will send them immediately." This took place to fulfill what had been spoken through the prophet, saying, "Tell your daughter of Zion, look, your king is coming to you, humble and mounted on a donkey, and on a colt, the foal of a donkey." The disciples went and did as Jesus had directed them. They brought the donkey and the colt and put their cloaks on them, and he sat upon them. A very large crowd then spread their cloaks on the road, and others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. The crowds that went ahead of him and that followed him were shouting, "Hosanna! Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest heaven!" When he entered Jerusalem, the whole city was in turmoil, asking, "Who is this?" The crowds were saying, "This is the prophet Jesus from Nazareth in Galilee."
Okay, let me get this out of the way. I didn't steal that donkey, okay? I borrowed it. And it wasn't even my idea. Jesus told me to take it, to borrow it, right? Okay, this is how it happened. Earlier today, there was a large group of us, and we were traveling from Bethany to Jerusalem. We stopped just outside the city, and Jesus looked at 2 of us, and he said there was an unridden donkey just inside the village and asked us to go get it. He said if anybody, asked us about it, we could just look at him and say, "The Lord needs it," and he'll send it back. So the 2 of us beat it into town, and the whole time we were like, what is Jesus going to do with a donkey, right? But by this point, we realized you don't second guess Jesus, right? He hadn't told us why, and we didn't ask. We just got him a donkey. And when we got back, that's when it happened. Some people put their coats on the donkey, and Jesus got on the donkey, and when he got on the donkey, I don't know. It's like everyone started shouting and dancing and singing, and some people were throwing their coats in front of the donkey. There was some of us that grabbed some palm branches, and we started waving them in the air, and that's when it clicked. Jesus had finally arrived. I know that sounds weird. No, it's like this. In the past, we would get excited because Jesus would do something, a miracle, or there would be some parable or something he said. We'd get excited about it, and Jesus would always be like, "Shh, come on, guys, nope, just be quiet, And then we'd come up with some idea, "Hey, let's do this or let's do that," and Jesus would be like, "No, guys, no, not now, not now." But today, today was now. Today, he finally let us shout and sing and dance and treat him like the Messiah that we'd all been waiting for. He finally showed up. I don't know. I don't know what tomorrow holds. It feels like it's something big, but who knows, But it doesn't matter what happens, because Jesus showed up. And there's nothing better than when Jesus shows up.
I have probably mentioned this far too many times and you're tired of hearing this, but when I was a kid, I was a choir boy in the choir in the Anglican Cathedral in Toronto, which was a very sort of high church Anglican, what used to be referred to, oddly enough, as smells and bells. I won't explain that, I'll just let you guess. But that meant liturgy was really important, and the symbolism of liturgy. And so on Palm Sunday, this is a big deal, because as we just heard, Jesus showed up, and it's a big deal. And we had palm branches. And I was reminded of this just the other day because I saw a picture from Robertson Wesley in Edmonton I'm guessing it was Palm Sunday last year, of their Palm Sunday procession. And we did the same thing. We had the ones that these palm crosses are made from, they're actually really long like this, right? And you can fan them out. But we had them like these long things, fans of palm that are about this long. Okay, I was about this tall at the time. That's about this long. And they're like just a big stick. And you had to hold them over your shoulder while you had a hymn book in the other hand, and you walked and sang. That was the procession, is that everybody had one of these. And the high altar cross had a big fan of palm behind it, and they were everywhere in the church, and everyone had one. You can imagine how, say, 10-year-old boys with something that looks suspiciously like a sword might want to treat that, which meant that before the service there was always probably a lot of stern warnings about it. But the point was that you had to process around the building holding a hymn book and singing and with this thing over your shoulder. And, by the way, of course, wearing a cassock and surplice. Like not just a gown like this, but something like this. And over that is a big white thing that's got like big arms, right? And it's really loose. So you're trying to walk and carry it. And the point of the procession, of course, is that it's a symbolic representation of something that you don't want to mess up. Because it's important. It's got to be perfect. You're the same distance apart, you're the same distance apart this way, and you're singing, you're holding this thing. Sooner or later somebody's going to trip, right? That's going to happen. Or sooner or later somebody's going to bump into somebody else, or sooner or later somebody's going to be looking down at their hymn book. They're going to catch up just far enough that the person in front with their palm branch over their shoulder is going to poke them in the eye. Something's going to happen. It's just crying out for a great story about wouldn't it be funny if something happened. It never did. Literally, nothing ever happened. It always went off flawlessly. Of course, I'm remembering that as a 10-year-old. But still, it was always perfect. Perfect. Just like in the story, it's perfect. The owner of the donkey gives up the donkey without a second thought. Jesus gets on the donkey. Jesus rides into Jerusalem. Everyone instantly recognizes that it is Jesus. And that's important, and they start cheering. They have palm branches to wave, and I'm sure they were all perfectly formed. And nobody's eyes got poked out with the long, pointy things, and everything just went great. Do you think? As I think back now, I think to myself, I desperately would have loved it if something had gone wrong. I don't mean that to be unkind or silly. It's just that how could it have possibly been perfect? Jesus, who was in all likelihood, if not a carpenter, at least a laborer. That was his career until he started ministry. And remember, in ministry, he walked everywhere, famously, walked everywhere. This is a guy who's probably never been on a donkey, let alone a horse or any other kind of animal. And he's going to get on a donkey, which according to at least 2 of the Gospels was unridden. A donkey that had never had anyone on its back. Jesus is going to get on it, and he's going to ride into a large crowd of people who are all yelling and screaming and waving stuff. They're also throwing stuff on the ground, and yet the donkey never trips or falls or anything. I know donkeys are famously, very easy, even-footed and everything. I know. But still, it just strikes me as kind of manufactured. And actually, I'm not meaning to say that there's anything wrong with it being that way, because there isn't, because it makes a very important and significant point, which is, by the way, Jesus, at least in Matthew's story, Jesus comes into Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives, which is where, in tradition, Hebrews believe that the Messiah would come from. He's riding on a donkey, which is prophesied in Zechariah and Isaiah that the Messiah would arrive like this. People cheer for Jesus, according to Matthew, because he's Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth. So, if not a great the great Messiah, he's at least a great prophet, and it's Passover. Hey, let's have a parade. Let's cheer for Jesus. In the prophecies, referred to as the king that was promised, right? So, whichever one of those things you're thinking when you're in the crowd, that's worth cheering about. Here's another thing to consider, though. We often look at this story and talk about how Jesus would have come into Jerusalem on this donkey, which is a sign of kingship, but also humility. It's also interesting, if you read the passage from Zechariah that this prophecy is based on, it's about how the king will come and on the donkey, and that all of the war horses will be moved, and all of the battles will end, and basically the demilitarization of everything, and there will be peace. And at the same time, because remember, Jesus is coming for Passover, in all likelihood, sometime this week, Pilate is coming into Jerusalem as well, with soldiers, because it's Passover. It's a festival. Who knows what can happen? So we better have some soldiers there. And because it's Passover, Pilate would in all likelihood have been there in person. The contrast of those two things. But here's an interesting thought about that, though. Notoriously, anytime the Jews tried to assemble as a crowd anywhere, the Romans put them down. Why didn't the Roman garrison go, hey, there's a bunch of Jews gathering around that gate and they're cheering for the gate and they're cheering for some guy, let's get out there and stop that? Why didn't they? Maybe it happened too fast. Again, it sounds to me like a little manufactured. And if the point of manufacturing that story is so that centuries later we'll recognize that Jesus was the Messiah and this was a sign of the arrival of the Messiah, that's great. That's great. But we just watched a little video of someone being someone who was there, being one of the disciples, moved by this moment in which Jesus shows up. And then we know what happens in the rest of the week. He said, I think something's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen. But we know. Imagine if you didn't know for a second. Imagine if you didn't know. And then all of the stuff that happens in the week ahead happens to you. Let me change the picture now. And it doesn't go well. The donkey doesn't want to have Jesus on his back. Not to mention let's not even get into how Matthew says apparently Jesus was riding two donkeys, because it says and. There's a donkey and a colt. How's he riding two donkeys? Is that some kind of circus thing where you got like that, 1 foot on each and you're doing that? How's that work? But so here's Jesus on the back of a donkey that doesn't want to be having somebody on his back. There's people cheering, there's people screaming, and they're waving palm branches and people getting smacked in the face. A fight probably just broke out over here because somebody got smacked in the face with a palm branch. And there's the poor donkey in the middle of all of this going, oh, jeez, oh, man. Trying to find a footing as he moves through this crowd. A friend of mine who's a minister in Tofield, Adam Hall, tells this story from way back in Saskatoon. He's from Saskatoon, of them deciding to have a donkey one Palm Sunday. They do it for real, And they did. And, of course, here's this poor donkey and people cheering and everything. And what happened is exactly what you would expect to happen. If you remove the possibility that the donkey could bolt or not want to come in the building, what else would a donkey do if it was scared? And it did it everywhere. because they didn't stop. They just kept going around. And so they ended up having to stop the service early and send people home because the smell was overwhelming. We're laughing now, but if you were there. And that's just the thing, though. If you'd been there, the moment when somebody says, hey, what's that guy doing on a donkey? It's who? Oh, hey, cool, that's awesome. And some cheering. But in the middle of all of that craziness and chaos, here's this donkey trying to pick its way. And maybe they had to pull it. Like they had to lead it. But maybe it was trying to get away. But it was trying to find its way through all of those branches and coats and stuff on the ground. It's like trying to find its way through a minefield, which is ironically an appropriate metaphor for today. But trying to pick its way through all of that and just get to the end. Yeah, isn't that like this week? Right, this is that 1 week, where we can quite literally go, here's the story from day to day. This happened on the Sunday. This happened on the Monday. This happened on the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, big day. Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We can go through that whole week. Do you think it went as smoothly as Palm Sunday? I don't think so. Just imagine the donkey just picking its way through all of that stuff, just trying to stay upright and get to the end. That's what this week is about. That's why it's so important that we not let go of the fact that it was a whole week of stuff. So I have little cards, by the way. I did this the last couple of years, and it's just like a business card size thing, on which is each of the scripture readings. If you're reading through the Gospel of Matthew, which piece goes with which day? So that if you take one home with you, and if you want to, you can read through the Gospel of Matthew a piece each day of what happens each day. Please do that. Because it reminds you each day. There's a piece each day. We've kind of gotten into this, we're doing it, in fact. We're kind of the middle ground. We have Palm Sunday, Monday, Thursday, Good Friday, and Easter Day, of course. That's the week. It's only 4 days, but it's a week. Back in the day, the 4th century when everyone went to church, back in the day, you went every day. You did. In fact, speaking of which, as a choir boy, every day, because the cathedral did that. And there was a piece for each day. And we're kind of unfortunately out of that habit, because it means then that we've kind of either tried to pile everything up so that you don't have to cover this story later in the week. We'll do it all today, which we're not, so you do. And then we have Easter, the two high points, the two celebrations. That's great. How do you have Easter without Good Friday? You can't have resurrection without death. You just can't. Can you get to the agony of Good Friday without the piece of the story you heard today? What about the piece of the story that we heard earlier this year about Jesus and Lazarus? Remember the story of Jesus raising Lazarus? And remember, part of that story is that the Pharisees that's the point at which they kind of thought, yeah, this Jesus has got to go. We need the story. You can't just jump from one thing to the next. We need the story. And sometimes the story is a big celebration like today, and it goes perfectly. Just like all of our live streaming and everything with Rising Spirit Ministry. It goes perfectly. People in Pinoca are laughing hysterically right now, just so you know. But it doesn't go perfectly, and sometimes it's a struggle. Just like the donkey trying to make his way through all of that stuff. Here's a cool thing, though. If you can imagine that donkey and all, like the chaos, and the donkey just kind of scared, trying to make its way through all of this, Jesus on his back. Somebody's probably pulling him part of the time. The other time he's trying to get away. People are yelling and shouting. The parade's got to end, doesn't it? And so what happens at the end of the parade? Well, I think what happens at the end of the parade is Jesus gets off the donkey, gives him a little pat on the side of the head, gives him some water, maybe some straw or something. Or hay, I don't know. What do you give a donkey? I'd give him a cheeseburger, probably. The point is, at the end of that wild ride, Jesus is there. And says thank you. And he probably blessed the donkey. This week has a lot of stuff in it. Next Sunday, Jesus is there. But you got to make your way through all of this stuff this week. So take the time to do that. I have a little basket with these cards, and I'll just start it here, and you can just pass it around. And if you'd like one, please take one. It tells you the story according to Matthew, which is the start of the story we heard today, and will help you each day make your way through. And just take a few minutes to wonder. Take a few minutes to wonder. I should just mention, by the way, because you're going to see when they come back up with what they've been doing today, that in Lent, the kids have been doing a lot around wonder. And they started out at the beginning of Lent, they had almost like little journals, little booklets, in which they were writing things that they wonder about. And we're going to try and post some of those on our Facebook page, because they wonder about some amazing things. Some amazing things, and you need to see what they are. But just take a moment each day this week to wonder about that piece of the story, to wonder about what Jesus is talking about, to wonder about what Jesus might be experiencing, what the disciples might be experiencing, what the donkey was feeling like today. This is your big moment. You can make an ass of yourself, and it's okay. But take the time to wonder about that.